Part of the magic of a FIFA World Cup was always how little was known about some of the teams and players. Before Teofilo Cubillas took the 1970 World Cup by storm at the age of only 20, few people outside of Peru had ever heard his name before. No one in Europe knew who Lakhdar Belloumi was before he upstaged the West Germans and their two-time Ballon d'Or winner Karl-Heinz Rummenigge with Algeria at the 1982 World Cup, before North Korea beat Italy and made it through to the knockout stages of the 1966 World Cup. Barely anything was known about North Korea throughout much of the world, let alone their football team or players. An element of that magic has been eroded at recent tournaments. The fluid movement of footballers across the globe means that, inevitably, we tend to already know about all of the best players because they already play for the biggest teams in the biggest leagues. And the internet means that every player and team has lost just an element of mystique. That means that there aren't as many players who go from totally unknown to overnight stardom at the World Cup these days, but that is not to say that many aren't still chronically underrated. And that is the subject of this video. Here is then, in my eyes, and in my eyes only, the most underrated player in every 2022 World Cup squad. Argentina. Angel Di Maria. You could argue that the Argentina team as a whole appears to have been pretty majorly overrated heading into this World Cup, where they were the second favourites behind Brazil, unbeaten in 36 games, but got off to a horrible start. But that doesn't mean that they don't still have some underrated individuals. Angel Di Maria might seem like a bit of an odd shout for Argentina, but I'll do my best to explain it. Di Maria is one of the biggest names in the Argentina squad, aged 34 now, and having been a star of the European game for some of the continent's biggest clubs for the past 15 years. Di Maria is perhaps not universally underrated. I think Argentinians have long appreciated his greatness, and even if they hadn't, then they certainly did following his winning goal in the 2021 Copa America final. There will inevitably be a bit of Anglo-centrism in this video then, and here in England, I think that Di Maria is vastly underrated, based largely upon what is widely considered as having been a single poor season at Manchester United, in which, as I always point out, Di Maria wasn't even that bad. Arguably one of the 10 greatest wide players of this millennium, I don't think that Di Maria is recognised as such, so he's my choice ahead of Nicolas Otamendi, who was never all that convincing at Manchester City, but has been great for Benfica, and his club and international comrade Enzo Fernandez, who missed out solely because a lot of people have been singing his praises recently, which just made me start to doubt whether he is actually all that underrated anymore. Australia. Harry Souttar. I should point out that I picked my most underrated player from every squad before a ball had been kicked at this World Cup, even though we will be more than a week in by the time that this comes out. That puts me in a bit of a lose-lose situation, since anyone that's having a bad World Cup will look like a terrible shout on my part, and anyone who has done really well will just look really obvious. I'm not sure which, if either of those, will be the case with Harry Souttar, but one thing is for sure, he's likely to be very busy at this World Cup, in an Australia team that one suspects will have plenty of defending to do. This was a relatively straightforward decision, I thought, because I don't think that the Australia squad is packed full of talent. I think that Souttar is one of their best players, and I think that he's massively underrated. Outstanding at Stoke City whenever I've watched him, Souttar is a man-mountain standing at 6'6" tall, who was born in Aberdeen and represented Scotland at youth level before declaring for the Socceroos in 2019. In 10 caps for Australia to date, Souttar has scored a quite incredible 10 goals, more than a goal every other game, albeit not against top-class opposition. Pivotal in both boxes then, really dependable, and still only 24 years old, Souttar should go on to win a century of caps for Australia, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he made a Premier League move over the next couple of years. Belgium. Michy Batshuayi. Again, this one could age horribly because Michy Batshuayi will get a rare opportunity at this World Cup, given Romelu Lukaku's fitness difficulties. Often viewed as the bridesmaid rather than the bride in this Belgium team, Batshuayi has tended to play second fiddle to Lukaku, who is Belgium's all-time leading goalscorer. Nonetheless, Batshuayi, despite rarely playing for Chelsea and a series of stop-start low moves that haven't really helped his development, is himself Belgium's fifth highest scorer of all time, with a mightily impressive 27 goals from 50 caps to date, with many of those appearances having come off the bench. Crucially, Batshuayi comes into this World Cup in absolutely fantastic form, having bagged 5 goals in 7 games in the Turkish Super League since signing for Fenerbahce over the summer, and 8 in 13 in all competitions. Is he as good as a prime Romelu Lukaku? No, obviously not. Is he good enough to start for a club like Chelsea? Also, probably no. Is he better than a lot of people give him credit for? I think that he is. And with the right service, he is capable of bagging a few goals in Qatar, even in an ageing Belgium side. Brazil. Richarlison. A lot of followers of English football seem to be a little bit bemused at Chiche's continued decision to start Richarlison as a number 9 ahead of Gabriel Jesus, given that he has predominantly played wide on the right for Tottenham, meanwhile Roberto Firmino didn't even make the Brazil squad. Brazil do not lack craft, guile or skill, with the likes of Neymar, Vinicius and Antony within their ranks, and Chiche clearly feels, rightly I think, that Richarlison gives them something a little bit different. What's more, Richarlison just seems to grow an extra inch taller, have an extra half a yard of pace, and possess an extra ounce of confidence in front of goal when he pulls on that famous yellow of Brazil. I contemplated going with Bruno Guimaraes, who I think is outstanding and who there were reportedly doubts about whether he would make the squad until quite recently, or Antony, who I think is still underestimated by a lot of English football fans, despite making a half-decent start to life at Old Trafford. But ultimately, Richarlison is the most maligned player, certainly within Brazil's starting 11, if not their entire squad. Whilst he might be wasteful at times, he also offers an awful lot, and he is pretty much the only member of the Brazil squad that publicly backed Lula against Bolsonaro. Alright, that last point isn't really relevant, but I think that he is fairly underrated, and I would love for him to have a great World Cup, so long as it isn't at England's expense. Cameroon. Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting. I said in my pre-tournament World Cup predictions that I fear for Cameroon, given some of the internal ruptures within their squad, but that doesn't alter the fact that they have some fine individuals. Most of their star men operate in forward areas, and Carl Toko Akambe is probably good value for an honourable mention, but Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting has been the butt of so many jokes over the years, some of them probably even from me, and he's now starting to prove all of his doubters wrong. Joining PSG off the back of getting relegated at Stoke City is, let's say, an unusual career path, and plenty of football fans were even more bemused when Bayern Munich took him on in 2020. Choupo-Moting's agent being the hardest working or most talented person in football was a frequent joke, but the German-born Cameroon international is actually a much more gifted footballer than most people seem to be willing to admit. Skillful and strong, Choupo-Moting is 6'3" tall, but he still has great feet. He's made a fantastic start to this season at Bayern, bagging 11 goals in 16 games, and ensuring that the German giants don't miss Robert Lewandowski quite as much as most people might have expected. Canada. Stefan Eustachio. Alphonso Davies is Canada's talisman, starman, and is worthy of any and all superlatives that you could possibly throw at him. But everyone knows that. The Canucks' second most important player, I think that you could quite reasonably argue, is the much less appreciated Stefan Eustachio. Born in Canada to Portuguese parents and raised in Portugal from the age of 7, Eustachio now plays for one of Portugal's big three, having recently signed for Porto. A really creative and industrious central or holding midfielder, Eustachio's energy is key to Canada, especially in alongside a 39-year-old Atiba Hutchinson in midfield. From what I've seen of him, Eustachio is excellent, and he could easily be Porto and Canada's main man in midfield for the best part of the next decade. Costa Rica. Oscar Duarte. I almost went with Keylor Navas for Costa Rica, who I always felt was chronically underrated at Real Madrid and even at PSG, but given that he is Costa Rica's most famous and celebrated footballer, it would seem a little odd to go with him in this context. Oscar Duarte is a lot less celebrated, unsurprisingly, given the fact that he is a 33-year-old centre-back who now plays his club football in Saudi Arabia. Formerly of Club Brugge, Espanyol, and Levante, Duarte has racked up 73 caps for Costa Rica, and he played a key role as they reached the quarter-finals of the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. Still a key man in a less talented Costa Rica team now, Duarte remains his country's best defender at the age of 33, and at least he won't have to travel far to Saudi Arabia to crack on with his league season whenever Costa Rica are dumped out. Most likely in the group stage. Croatia. Josip Juranovic. Croatia always seem to have lots of perennially underrated footballers, and this World Cup is no exception. Marcelo Brozovic remains, I think, chronically underrated. Young Josko Gvardiol is perhaps not being talked about with sufficiently high regard just yet, aged only 20, and even Marco Lavea could be worth keeping an eye on if he does get game time at this World Cup, aged 29 and a bit of a rookie on the international stage, but so deadly for Hajduk Split, and clearly someone who knows how to find the back of the net. I have picked out Celtic's Josip Juranovic ahead of all three of them though, who was amazing in his single season at Legia Warsaw, and has been just as impressive since Celtic signed him for an absolute bargain fee of just £2.5 million. If he played for a Premier League team, he would be valued at least 10 times that price now. Denmark. Andreas Skov. Unlike with the Croatia team, I think that most of Denmark's star men do actually get quite a lot of love. The likes of Simon Kjær, Thomas Delaney, and Pierre-Emil Højbjerg are all pretty much universally liked and lauded as very good footballers, even whilst performing traditionally unfashionable roles, which forced me to go with Andreas Skov, who may or may not actually start for Denmark at this World Cup. Only 22 years of age, Olsen began his career at Denmark's finest talent factory of Nordsjælland, and he recently joined Club Brugge following 3 years at Bologna. Quick, gifted, and capable of crossing and shooting with either foot, Olsen plays predominantly on the right, and he has already won 24 caps for Denmark since making his debut in 2020. Ecuador. Moises Caicedo. Moises Caicedo is widely regarded as being Ecuador's star man, quite rightly, yet I still think that he is underrated in a broader context. Signed by Brighton for just €5 million almost 2 years ago, Caicedo spent last season on loan at Beerschot in Belgium, and he has returned to England as one of the busiest and most effective midfielders in the Premier League, still aged only 21. Quick, industrious, relentless in his defensive duties, but also really competent when in possession of the ball, Caicedo's potential is pretty frightening. And Brighton could be forgiven for thinking that if they could get £62 million for Marc Cucurella, their Ecuadorian magician probably ought to set a world record transfer fee. England. Jordan Pickford. The first goalkeeper to feature, I honestly believe that Jordan Pickford is one of the most underrated players at this entire World Cup. The phrase that is so often used with Pickford is that he's never let England down, as though somehow perhaps he just hasn't made any massive mistakes yet. In reality, Pickford was one of, if not England's very best player at both the 2018 World Cup and Euro 2020, even saving as many penalties as Gianluigi Donnarumma in the Euros final. What's more, Pickford hasn't just impressed for England. For the last 18 months to 2 years, he has been equally impressive for Everton, and few Premier League goalkeepers can have saved their teams more points. I think that Pickford's talents, when many were so critical of him a couple of years ago, are gradually becoming more accepted. But for now, he remains massively underrated in my eyes. France. Antoine Griezmann. It is interesting how the tide of public opinion changes. At Euro 2016 and the 2018 World Cup, Antoine Griezmann was widely regarded as being France's star man, whereas now he's barely an afterthought for those who don't follow Les Bleus, despite the fact that he's still only 31 years old. Of course, a lot has happened during that time, including Griezmann's ill-fated move to Barca, the unusual clause in his contract when he returned to Atletico, and the emergence of Kylian Mbappe. But Griezmann remains a magnificent footballer, and he still routinely illustrates that fact in the blue of France. Playing in the number 10 role at this World Cup, don't rule out Griezmann being one of the stars of the tournament, even if it is Mbappe who takes most of the headlines. Honourable mentions go to William Saliba, who won't start for France but is immense, and Youssouf Fofana, who has really come into his own at Monaco over these last 12 months. Germany. Niklas Füllkrug. I doubt that we will see much of Niklas Füllkrug at this World Cup, with Hansi Flick more likely to start Kai Havertz as a false nine, but that doesn't mean that I can't pick him as the most underrated player within the German squad. To be totally honest, I very nearly went with Havertz, who I still think is a special talent despite his indifferent form at Chelsea, or Nico Schlotterbeck, who I think comes in for a bit of undue criticism at times. Füllkrug is probably the least well-known player in this German squad outside of Germany though, unsurprisingly perhaps, given that he only recently became the oldest German debutant in more than 20 years, at the age of 29. Füllkrug spent last season in the second Bundesliga, where he scored 19 goals to fire Werder Bremen to promotion. There is a big gap, traditionally, between the Bundesliga and the second Bundesliga, but Füllkrug has made a stunning start to life back in the top flight, with 10 goals in 14 games so far this season. That might not even get him on the pitch in Qatar, but he is a big, brave menace who is in outstanding form right now. Ghana. Tariq Lamptey. Rarely do I waste a perfectly good opportunity to opine about Tariq Lamptey, and this video is no exception. Ghana have a young squad, blessed with a handful of talented 22 and 23-year-olds, including Mohamed Salisu, Salis Abdul Samed, and Mohamed Kudus. And the biggest question is whether several players who only recently declared for Ghana will click in time for this World Cup. Tariq Lamptey is one such example, having only won his first cap for the Black Stars a couple of months ago, presumably swayed by England's abundance of talent at right back. One of the shortest players in the Premier League, at just 5 feet and 4 inches tall, Lamptey is also one of the division's most exciting players, to watch in my eyes at least. Rapid, adventurous, and always willing to take a man on, I think that his spell on the sidelines made a lot of people just forget quite how good he is, so he features just ahead of Salisu and Kudus for me. Iran. Ahmed Nouralahi. Iran are a team in which the whole is certainly greater than the sum of its parts, with the exception of Porto star Mehdi Taremi, who is excellent, but everyone knows it. Far fewer people know about Ahmed Nouralahi, unsurprisingly given that he has only ever played in Iran and the United Arab Emirates. Aged 29 and capped only 28 times, Nouralahi is still an important player for Iran though, industrious off the ball and economic on it, and he will be a key part of Iran's midfield engine room, upon which their success at this tournament will almost certainly be dependent. Japan. Hidemasa Morita. I feel confident in stating that Hidemasa Morita is underrated, since he has a Wikipedia page befitting of a non-league player who has made about 7 career appearances in its scarcity, rather than a star man for one of the best national teams in Asia. Signed by Sporting CP over the summer from Santa Clara, having been playing his club football in Portugal for almost 2 years now, Morita typifies everything that is good about this Japan team. Energetic, hard-working, and gifted on the ball, he forms a really decent midfield duo in alongside Wataru Endo, and I suspect that his reputation will continue to grow over the next couple of years. Mexico. Edson Alvarez. Only 8 clubs have more players at the 2022 World Cup than Ajax, and one of the Dutch giants' biggest names at the finals is Edson Alvarez. Contracted to Ajax since 2019, when he arrived in Amsterdam from Club America, Alvarez has since made more than 100 appearances for Ajax, in addition to having won an incredible 59 caps for Mexico at the age of only 25. Capable of playing either at centre-back, defensive midfield or in central midfield, Alvarez is dogged, determined and really strong in the tackle. There are less well-known players in this Mexico team than him, like Alexis Vega or Henry Martin, but I think Alvarez is the most underrated. Morocco. Sofiane Amrabat. Arguably the most underrated team heading into this World Cup, Morocco have a good balance to their squad, along with some really talented individuals. Ziyech and Boufal are capable of causing havoc on either flank, despite Ziyech barely playing for Chelsea and Boufal being let go by Southampton. Meanwhile, I was always a big fan of Romain Saiss during his time at Wolves. Sofiane Amrabat, the younger brother of former Morocco international Nordin Amrabat, formerly of Watford, might just be the one to watch though. Formerly of Feyenoord and now a star man at Fiorentina, Amrabat can play in either defensive or central midfield, and there are very few glaring weaknesses to his game. Solid both in and out of possession, he gets around the pitch well, he can pick a pass, and he's neat and tidy on the ball. The Netherlands. Frenkie de Jong. He might still be one of the biggest names in the Netherlands squad, but Frenkie de Jong is starting to feel like a bit of a forgotten man, and few people have or were talking about him being one of the potential stars of this World Cup. It would be fair to say that everything hasn't gone perfectly for de Jong since making his big money move to Barcelona. He reportedly still hasn't been paid most of his wages for a start, but there remain few players in world football better than him at doing what he does best. I'm not massively sold on this Netherlands team, despite Louis van Gaal's claims that they are major contenders, but de Jong is crucial to everything that they do, and he'll have to be right at it if they are to stand a chance of making a splash at this tournament. A special mention to Martin de Roon, who has been excellent ever since leaving Middlesbrough, and Cody Gakpo, who, though young and only capped 9 times, is already very highly rated and therefore couldn't feature. Poland. Robert Lewandowski. A player that I like a lot, but most people don't really know about. I'm just kidding. What am I like? Poland. Sebastian Szymanski. Yet to really turn on the style for Poland, Sebastian Szymanski has only scored 1 goal for his country to date, but he is nonetheless a player of real talent. Quick, hard-working, and capable of playing almost anywhere in midfield or in any wide area. Szymanski has been contracted to Dynamo Moscow since 2019, but he joined Feyenoord over the summer following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Outstanding in the Netherlands ever since, where he has scored 6 goals in 13 Eredivisie games, he gets my shout ahead of MLS marksman Karol Swiderski. Portugal. William Carvalho. William Carvalho seems to have been around forever now, and despite seemingly having been linked with every single team that has ever played in the Premier League, he is still yet to play in England. The fact that Carvalho joined Real Betis in 2018, rather than one of Europe's so-called super clubs with which he was linked, has perhaps just dented his reputation a little, but he remains a real talent and an important player for Portugal. Strong, intelligent, and vastly underrated in possession of the ball, Carvalho is my choice for Portugal, with an honourable mention for Rafael Leão, who I suspect would start for Portugal if they weren't managed by a fossil. That was uncalled for and ageist, I apologise unreservedly, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Qatar. Abdulaziz Hatem. Qatar's hastily assembled World Cup squad, which I made a recent video detailing how it came into being, has 2 real stars, Almoez Ali and Akram Afif, but everyone knows that they are Qatar's star men. Outside of those 2, but largely unknown outside of Asia, Abdulaziz Hatem is probably the next best player in this Qatar squad. One of the team's more experienced players, aged 32, and capped 109 times, Hatem has played for 3 of the country's biggest clubs, Al Arabi, Al Harafa, and Al Rayyan. Don't get me wrong, he is probably a lower to mid-table championship standard midfielder, but that is an impressive standard for a Qatari, and it makes him a more than worthy inclusion. Saudi Arabia. Salem Al-Davesi. Saudi Arabia were hopeless at the last World Cup in Russia, and since every member of their squad plays their domestic football in Saudi Arabia, they're all fairly unknown outside of Asia. It makes sense then to go with the team star man, Salem Alderweireld, who is the best player that the country has produced in decades. Quick and skillful, Alderweireld made one appearance on loan at Villarreal in 2018, but other than that, he has spent his entire career playing for Al Hilal. Senegal. Famara Diédhiou. I initially went with Boulaye Dia for Senegal, but so many people are tipping him to make an impact as a replacement for the injured Sadio Mane that I convinced myself that he could no longer be deemed underrated. Famara Diédhiou, on the other hand, I have barely seen mentioned, but I was always impressed with him during his time at Bristol City. A big money signing by Championship standards, at £5.3 million, Diédhiou is a big man full stop. At 6'4" tall, and at times he looks even bigger than that. Now playing for Alanyaspor in Turkey, Diédhiou isn't the most gifted, but there will be times at this tournament where Senegal will look to go long, and he could be a real weapon. Serbia. Filip Kostic. So widely tipped as dark horses at this World Cup that Serbia have surely ceased to be underrated at this stage. Serbia's big hitters are very well known and well appreciated. But Filip Kostic is someone who has certainly flown under the radar at times over the last decade. A world-class crosser of ball, Kostic joined Juventus over the summer, following 4 years at Eintracht Frankfurt. South Korea. Jung-woo Young. A vastly experienced midfielder, Jung-woo Young should be right at home at this World Cup, having spent the last 4 years playing his club football in Qatar for Al Sadd. A talented free kick taker who can play almost anywhere through the spine of a team, from centre-back to attacking midfield, Woo Young has been capped 68 times by South Korea. It's no secret who South Korea's star man is. But after Son and Lee Jae-sung, few men are more important to Paulo Bento than the often overlooked Al Sadd star. Spain. Ansu Fati. I don't think anyone in the Spain squad is massively underrated. Alvaro Morata perhaps gets an unduly hard time. Reports of Sergio Busquets' demise have been greatly exaggerated, and I think Gavi is even better than most people realise. But my choice is Ansu Fati, who, were it not for injuries, I think would already be recognised as one of the best players in the world by now, let alone one of the world's best young players. Incredibly skillful and a nightmare to defend against, Fati isn't a nailed-on starter for either Barcelona or Spain at this moment in time, but he is one of only a handful of players in all of world football who I think is capable of one day winning the Ballon d'Or. Switzerland. Remo Freuler. Switzerland are a pretty underrated team all round, who tend to give a good account of themselves at most major tournaments, and Remo Freuler is the standout for me. Recently signed by Nottingham Forest, following 6 years at Atalanta. A brilliant all-round midfielder, Freuler is smart both in and out of possession, he's a real tireless workhorse, and technically, he's highly adept as well. He's been a rock for Switzerland for most of the last 5 years alongside Granit Xhaka, so he gets the nod from me. Tunisia. Hannibal Mejabri. I'm not sure how much football Hannibal is likely to actually get for Tunisia at the World Cup, but if it was up to me, it would be lots. Currently on loan at Birmingham City, on the few occasions that I've seen him this season, he has been one of the best midfielders in the Championship. Aged 19, Hannibal looked like he could one day start for Manchester United to me, and given Tunisia are among the weakest teams at this World Cup, that is very high praise indeed. United States. Yunus Musa. I have to say, I've liked the look of Brendan Aronson at Leeds United this season, but Yunus Musa has the potential to be the greatest footballer that the United States has ever produced. Born in New York but raised in Italy and England, Musa now lives in Spain, where he is rapidly closing in on 100 appearances for Valencia at the age of only 19. Capped 21 times by the US MNT to date, Musa is a bit of a jack of all trades, and I like him a lot. Uruguay. Sebastian Coates. It was a toss-up between Sebastian Coates and Georgian de Arrascaeta for Uruguay, and in the end I went with Coates, partly because he is likely to play a lot more football at this World Cup. I know that isn't remotely relevant to the stated criteria, but I had to separate them somehow. Coates is underrated here in England at least, following underwhelming spells at both Liverpool and Sunderland, but he has been nothing short of outstanding ever since he signed for Sporting Club de Portugal 5.5 years ago. Now aged 32, he'll start whenever Uruguay play a back three, which might be all of their games, and Diego Alonso will have no reservations about putting him in his team. Wales. Ben Davies. I very nearly went with Harry Wilson for Wales, who I think has been underrated ever since his loan spell at Bournemouth, or Kiefer Moore, who now plays for Bournemouth and is probably unlike any other centre-forward at this World Cup. But Ben Davies is arguably now the best player in the Wales squad, given Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey, while still massively important to Wales, are clearly well past their best. Davies is only 29 years old though, and his importance to this Wales team really cannot be overstated. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.